Communist considers Catholicism. Cuba's Raul Castro hints he may return to the Catholic Church. Summit for the poor. The question is how best to lift them from poverty. Deadly storms. At least 5 dead and many still missing after tornadoes hit Texas and Arkansas. And life moving forward. We look at the future of the pro-life movement. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, May 11th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Breaking news to share with you tonight. The Cuban bishops say Pope Francis will visit their island nation September 19th through the 22nd. Their website says the Holy Father is now considering stops in 2 other cities in addition to Havana. This news comes just a day after Cuban President Raul Castro visits Pope Francis at the Vatican. He now says he could return to the Catholic Church. The Holy Father and Castro talked privately on Sunday. Castro, of course, is the brother of Fidel Castro, who brought communists to power in Cuba. After leaving the Vatican, Raul Castro said if the Pope continues on the path he's taking, he will go back to the Church. Francis will visit Cuba in September en route to the U.S., as we mentioned. St. John Paul II, who helped to bring down communism in Eastern Europe, was the first Pope to visit the island nation in 1998. Of course, Pope Benedict XVI also visited Cuba in 2012. Alan Holdren is joining us from Rome. And Alan, here you have a Communist Party leader meeting with the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Very interesting discussion here. The communists haven't been very favorable not only to Catholicism, but to any religion, right?
That's right. Raul Castro actually said in a news briefing after his meeting with the Italian president, after his meeting with Pope Francis, that in Cuba, Communist Party members cannot be a part of any religious affiliation. He said now that's changing. He even said that if the Pope continues like this, that he will go back to praying and even go back to the church. That's an interesting comment from the president of the Communist Party there in Cuba. He also mentioned that he was Jesuit trained just like his brother Fidel.
So he talked also about when the Pope visits Cuba that he'll actually attend the masses, and he said that in a very positive way, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, and you could see from the footage that we got there of their meeting, even though it was private, that there was a really warm relationship between them. They spoke for nearly an hour in both of their native tongue, which is Spanish, and you could see really that warmth between them. And the fact that he said that he may return to the church, the fact that he said that he may or he will go to these masses in Cuba really shows that he appreciates Pope Francis, and he said that he appreciates him in particular for his wisdom and his modesty.
There's a lot of skepticism about this guy, Alan. Can he be taken seriously, and what does the church have to gain from better relations with Cuba?
Well, I suppose we have to take him at his word. I know that Pope Francis also seems to hold him in high enough esteem. Raul thanked him for his work in bringing the U.S. and Cuba closer together. He said that he brought the sentiments of all of Cuba to the Pope yesterday. What does the church have to gain from these improving ties, not only between the U.S. and Cuba, but also between Cuba and the Vatican? It's a better treatment there in Cuba. For decades, the church has suffered from restrictions on religious freedom that includes not being able to celebrate in public without the government's stamp of approval, not being able to receive religious texts without an approval from the government there, and also just replacing priests. They only have 2 seminaries in all of Cuba. They aren't able to bring in priests without them getting a visa from the government. That could all change with this opening of Cuba to the world.
Very interesting developments, and we'll be watching it closely for you. Alan Holdren in Rome. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Brian.
Mike Gonzalez is Cuban-born and raised, spent his childhood there. He's a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a foreign policy expert. You're a little more skeptical than Alan on this Raul Castro guy, aren't you?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to take exception with what he said, that we have to take Raul Castro at his word. I don't see any basis on that, and I find it very disturbing that in this country we're giving Raul Castro his word that he will return to the church, any credence whatsoever. I say that as someone who wishes that Raul Castro had a deathbed conversion or even one before his death in order to free the people of Cuba and realize what evil he's done to his country. But no, there's no evidence to take him at his word. He's not going to do this.
You were an altar boy in Cuba when you were a kid.
That's right, I was.
And you were hassled for it.
I paid dearly for being an altar boy in Cuba as a boy. Even the principal of my school, a grown man, mocked me in front of others because I was an altar boy and because I attended Mass. This is a sham, what's taking place here. Raul Castro gave the Pope a cross about migrants, a migrant's cross. The government of Raul Castro has seen 1/5 of the island population become exiles, and the 4/5 who have had to stay on the island, when they dare escape on rafts, they're sunk in the middle of the ocean. They're shot at. Since Castro and Obama had the negotiations in December, hundreds of people have been put in prison for political reasons. Nothing is taking place here except for hypocrisy.
But Pope Francis doesn't seem like a guy who could be easily fooled. Perhaps he has some kind of a plan. What do you see going on?
The Pope should have taken Raul Castro's migrant cross and questioned why they shoot at rafters who leave Cuba, why they sink men, women, and children in the middle of the ocean. The Pope, and I hope the Pope will be more vocal when he goes to Cuba. The Pope is not infallible on matters of foreign policy. I say this as a practicing Catholic. The whole world is being taken in. This cannot be given credence. Raul Castro does not mean a word he says.
Well, we'll see what happens when the Pope visits. We now find out that he'll be there for probably 3 days, visiting possibly 3 cities, when we thought it was just going to be a stopover. So certainly interesting developments.
I hope he meets the ladies in white who are beaten up by government mobs when they go on their way to church in protest at the fact that people are kept in politics, people are kept in prison as political prisoners.
It would be very interesting. Mike Gonzalez, we appreciate you joining us from the Heritage Foundation.
Thank you for having me.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Of course, the church has always championed the poor, and Pope Francis takes that to a new level. There are many ways to address poverty, but there's often disagreement how to do that. Jason Calvi reports on a summit here in D.C. striving for common ground. Jason?
Brian, President Obama will be right here on a panel discussion here at Georgetown University tomorrow. It's part of a 3-day summit on fighting poverty in the United States. It's bringing together people of both political parties and many faith traditions.
A Georgetown think tank, the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought, is teaming up with the National Association of Evangelicals. The goal is to bring people of various backgrounds together to figure out ways to beat poverty. Organizers say they want to create a new sense of urgency and form new partnerships. They say it's a response to Pope Francis's call to place the poor at the center of the agenda.
45 years ago, leading evangelicals said John Kennedy should not be elected president because he would take advice from the Pope. And now the only thing that really unites Democrats and Republicans is they need advice from the Pope.
To me, it lies as one of the central challenges of the gospel, is to work on behalf of all those who are marginalized and who are discarded, as Pope Francis says, in our society. That means the unborn, it means those who are poor, it means those who are powerless.
Taking part in the summit, Democrats and Republicans, as well as charities like the Salvation Army and Catholic Charities, as well as the U.S. Bishops' Conference.
And tomorrow, President Obama will be here. Organizers are calling it unprecedented. He'll be speaking about poverty with a public policy professor at Harvard, as well as the head of the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank. Brian?
Jason Calvi at Georgetown. Thank you, Jason. And was President Obama's account of the 2011 raid that killed Osama bin Laden a lie? That is the claim in a stunning new article by Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. The administration claims to have found bin Laden by tracking his courier. Well, Hersh tells CNN Pakistan knew bin Laden's whereabouts and cut a deal with the U.S.
The deal was we weren't going to announce it. They were going to take him out. They had to kill him. That was the agreement. There's no question this was an assassination from the get-go, despite what the White House says. They had to kill him, and they had to bring him out, the body out, and then we were going to announce it. The initial plan was, the plan that everybody agreed to.
Hirsch has been criticized for his heavy use of anonymous sources. A White House spokesman calls his article patently false. Well, after calling more than 40 witnesses, lawyers for Johar Tsarnaev rest their case in the penalty phase of his trial. Death penalty opponent Sister Helen Prejean testified that Tsarnaev expressed genuine sorrow for the victims of the Boston Marathon bombing when she visited with him. The judge allowed her to testify over the objections of prosecutors. They portray Tsarnaev as a heartless terrorist who placed a bomb behind children, killing an 8-year-old boy. Severe weather takes its toll this past weekend. At least 5 people are now confirmed dead after storms hit Texas and Arkansas. Our Wyatt Goolsby reports.
Inside! Inside!
A scene of devastation in East Texas after severe weather and a reported tornado touching down in the town of Van.
Get inside!
The county's emergency management team is describing the scene as a, quote, mass casualty incident. Dozens of injuries have been reported. There is significant damage and a possible gas leak throughout parts of the city of 2600. This weekend,
a very pronounced funnel cloud and tornado in progress.
Over 70 tornadoes were reported from South Dakota to Texas.
There goes the school! There goes the school!
This video shows a tornado hitting a high school in Iowa. The school, sheltering 100 people, all evacuated just in the nick of time as tornado sirens blare. Another tornado ripping through a small South Dakota town, injuring multiple people and damaging over 20 buildings.
I step outside and there's no wind, no rain, no noises, and then I can hear the howling, sound like an airplane. That was the first tornado I've ever seen in my life.
On Saturday, a tornado struck Eastland County, Texas, killing 1 person and injuring another critically. Storms also dumping rain and baseball-sized hail on parts of Oklahoma, resulting in floods. People carried to safety by helicopters in Denton County, Texas. Since Friday, this area has received over 10 inches of rain. Back in East Texas, there are still 8 people unaccounted for. Authorities in Van say this afternoon they've had local and state rescue crews going door to door in neighborhoods that have been hit the hardest.
Coming up, GOP politicians vying for their party's presidential nomination attempt to stand out. And of those presidential hopefuls, who stands up for life? Monday, May the 11th, and we're grateful you're joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Republicans seeking the 2016 presidential nomination try to outdo each other in arguing that President Obama is a failed leader.
China is increasingly claiming territory in the South China Sea. Vladimir Putin invades his neighbors. Iran continues to carry out its efforts to dominate the Middle East. And radical jihadists behead Christians and even conduct attacks in Texas. And America under Barack Obama appears unable to do anything about these things.
Obama not the only Democrat getting slammed at this weekend's GOP Freedom Summit in South Carolina. Former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina continued going after Hillary Clinton, the Democratic favorite for 2016.
Did you really see no conflicts of interest? While your family foundation took millions of dollars in donations and your husband took very large speakers' fees from foreign governments who had business before you while you served as Secretary of State.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz and Donald Trump were also there, among others. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush condemns the Obama administration's use of, quote, coercive federal power to limit religious freedom. Bush, who's preparing to enter the Republican presidential race, gave the commencement address Saturday at Virginia's Liberty University.
From the standpoint of religious freedom, you might even say it's a choice between the Little Sisters and Big Brother. And I'm going with the Little Sisters.
Me too. Bush, a Catholic convert, is an outspoken critic of Obamacare's health and human services mandate. Of course, it requires employers, including the Little Sisters of the Poor, to provide health insurance for employees that includes abortifacients and birth control. We have Republican political consultant John Brabender with us. When do you expect Bush to declare, and why is he waiting?
Well, I think, first of all, it's very early. Let's not kid ourselves. This is still pretty darn early.
It is.
Number one. Number two is I think he's going to announce in June, if I had to guess, at some point in there. I think the key, though, is everybody's looking back to Rick Perry's big entry last time and then failed campaign that a lot of the people who were with Perry felt that he rushed the campaign, got into it too quickly, wasn't ready, didn't have the campaign set up. And I think a lot of people want to avoid that mistake. I think there's, if I remember right, 5 announced candidates right now. I think there's probably another 6 that will announce before it's over.
And he's a Catholic convert. There are a number of Catholics in the field here. Is it possible that we'll see a pro-life Catholic ticket for the Republicans?
Yeah, well, I mean, as somebody who has 16 years of Catholic schooling behind them, I certainly am rooting for the home team, and I think it's important. But I think you can go further than that. I mean, one thing that Jeb Bush said there, that he and other candidates like Rick Santorum and others are talking a lot about, are religious freedom that is under attack. And it is under attack, and you're going to hear that all the way through the Republican primaries. There's other big issues, obviously, but that's a huge one, and it will be talked about.
In UK, the Conservatives did very well over the weekend. They were expected to be a very tight race. Does that give us any indication of what might happen here in 2016?
Well, I look at it, too, that came on the heels of Netanyahu's victory in Israel, in the same type of pattern. It was supposed to be close. It looked like he wasn't going to win. And then the polls seemed to change on Election Day. And I think a lot of this is there is some fear in the world. There is some fear about radical Islam. There is people looking for strong leadership. And frankly, we've seen now among Republican voters, national defense, fighting terrorism, fighting Islamist extremists has gone from being about the 5th issue to the #1 issue that's on their minds. And so I think that actually bodes well for conservatives. They generally are seen by all voters as more likely to fight effectively for those type of causes.
Will they fight each other? How bitter will this campaign get before they narrow it down?
Yeah, well, it would be very hopeful and naive among all of us to think this still isn't going to be a hard-fought campaign. But first of all, somebody will be behind at some point and somebody will be ahead, and that's when everything changes. Second of all, their super PACs are raising millions and millions, and so they will do the heavy damage, all the air damage, if you will. But there are going to be fewer debates this time. I think that it'll be a little bit more cordial when you see the debates and a little uglier when you see the ads.
Well, as it moves along, we'll have you back. John Brabender, thank you.
Thank you.
From middle school students to politicians, Catherine Zeltner tells us tonight how the pro-life movement is focusing on its future.
42 years after Roe v. Wade, an estimated 21% of U.S. pregnancies end in abortion. But here at Maryland Right to Life's annual banquet,
candidate for the office of the President of the United States of America.
The key number is 2016. Dr. Ben Carson, a Republican candidate for president and a retired neurosurgeon, says he's uniquely qualified to fight for pro-life rights.
I've spent my entire professional career trying to save the lives of children and trying to improve the quality of life for children. I've even operated on children while they're still in the mother's womb.
Carson's book, Gifted Hands, shares his story to those who haven't made it to med school or even high school quite yet.
What's your favorite class?
Yours, of course.
Mary Crane read Carson's book to her 7th grade class last year, which included John Paul LaValle, an autistic student. The pro-life message stuck. John Paul's Right to Life essay won first place this year. He writes, people with autism would not get a chance to write a book about their experience, or be a genius, or be a good friend if they were aborted. From potential presidents to current students, the focus tonight is on the future of the pro-life movement.
They're an answer to a prayer.
Dolores D. Becker helped start the March for Life. She's thrilled to see today's youth rallying to end abortion.
They're so exuberant. It took us so long to get people to wake up.
Dr. Carson says today's pro-lifers need to keep marching forward.
We now have the torch, and we're carrying it for those who can't carry it for themselves. Just like there were many before us who carried it for us, and now we need to return the favor.
Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, Britain is still reeling today from Friday's surprising election results. And Pope Francis greets thousands marching for life in Italy. We're grateful you're joining us for our Monday evening edition of EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Too close to call? Hardly. British Conservatives emerge as clear-cut winners. A stunning result in the British elections. The Conservative Party's unexpectedly strong victory, returning Prime Minister David Cameron to 10 Downing Street.
I truly believe we're on the brink of something special in our country.
Appealing to voters' concerns about financial stability, Cameron won an absolute majority, taking 331 of the possible 650 seats up for grabs in the House of Commons. Poll after poll had predicted that the race between the Conservatives and the opposition Labour Party would be a dead heat.
In a perverse, sadistic way, I'm very happy because a lot of the people I don't like have not been re-elected.
Speaking on the steps of the Prime Minister's official residence, Cameron adopted a conciliatory tone, announcing his new Conservative majority government Friday after meeting with Queen Elizabeth II.
We must ensure that we bring our country together. We will govern as a party of one nation, one United Kingdom.
The British Prime Minister paying tribute to his former coalition partner, Liberal Democrat Nick Clegg, and the opposition Labour Party's Ed Miliband. Both resigned as leaders of their parties after disappointing election results.
I'm truly sorry I did not succeed.
Labour took a beating mostly from energized Scottish nationalists who pulled off a landslide in Scotland.
Scottish Labour are waking up after a dreadful night for our party. Far worse than that, we are waking up on a terrible morning for Scotland and for working class people across the UK.
Despite the political turmoil in Great Britain, all party leaders paused on Friday to mark the 70th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. Winners and losers held wreaths of red poppies, observing a moment of silence in honor of the fallen in World War II. Joining us is Philippe Lecour, a visiting fellow with the Brookings Institute Center on the U.S. and Europe. David Cameron says the UK is on the brink of something special. What do you think he means?
Well, perhaps a EU referendum, Britain joining or leaving the European Union, and that, you know, he promised there will be a referendum in the next 12 or 15 months. So if the UK leaves the EU, that will be pretty dramatic. Now, of course, he says he's going to support the UK staying inside the EU, but you know, there's no guarantee of that.
Do you think he can keep it together, or is there a chance that Great Britain's going to pull out?
It's a little bit strange for someone who wants to stay in the EU to organize a referendum about it, honestly. So yeah, there is a good chance. The City of London, the financial sector, is in favor of staying in the EU. The EU is in favor of keeping the UK. The US is probably in favor of Europe sticking together. But you know, this election is a lot about Little England. You know, it's about England sticking together. Scotland has a different result. So really, it's hard to tell, to predict the future.
Well, the Scots who wanted to pull away from the UK certainly have a much stronger base in Parliament now, don't they?
They have 59 seats out of a total of 59. In addition to running Scotland, because they have the majority, an overall majority of the Scottish Parliament, which is another institution that was created by Tony Blair 15 years ago. So basically, they run their own place and they can influence the UK Parliament. And on top of it, they are pro-European, which makes it quite interesting versus the English, who are not really in favor of.
So Cameron has a good victory on Friday, but he's got a lot of work ahead of him, doesn't he?
He's got a 12 MP majority, which is not a lot. I mean, many governments have fallen with such short majorities. So he may have to make friends in other smaller parties as well. Plus the EU issue will be back and you know, might actually undermine his government for the next few years.
Very interesting. Philippe Lecour, thank you so much for your insight tonight. Well, Pope Francis greets thousands of people who were part of the March for Life in Rome on Sunday.
È importante collaborare insieme per difendere e promuovere la vita.
The Holy Father saying it's important to work together to defend life. It's estimated 400,000 people participated in Italy's 5th March for Life. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and we say goodnight tonight with a few more special moments from the March for Life this weekend in Rome. Good night and God bless you.